Thank you so much for joining. Truen is a founding partner of SAOTA, a globally recognized architecture firm based in Cape Town. After graduating from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in 1991, Greg has built a career defined by his innovative use of light, space, and landscape, crafting architecture that resonates across diverse global contexts. In addition to his role at SAOTA, Greg is a strong advocate for architectural education. He has championed SAOTA's bursary program, which has awarded over 30 bursaries to support aspiring architects. He also serves as non-executive director at the School of Explorative Architecture in Cape Town, contributing to the development of new talent in architectural thinking. Greg, over to you, sir. Careful of the mute mic there, Greg. Greg, I think you might still be muted.
There we go.
There
Sorry,
you
I
go.
couldn't, I
Perfect.
couldn't unmute. I couldn't unmute myself for a moment. Okay, let me share the presentation. I think it's this one. Okay, can you see the presentation? Is it in presenter mode or is it full screen? Hi, Skura, can you hear me?
Greg, it's in presenter mode.
All right, I think it's the wrong one. Let me start that again.
Yeah. Perfect, Greg.
Oh, hang on. Now I can't see. There we go. I can see presenter
Perfect on
mode.
this side.
Are you seeing full screen?
Yeah, full screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, another little glitch here. Let me sort that out. There we go. All right. Good morning, everyone. Skura, thanks for the warm introduction. Today, I want to share a little bit about our journey and talk about some of the core ideas that shape our work, ideas that we find universal and adaptable and allow us to create unique and appropriate projects in quite diverse environments. My name is Greg Truen. I grew up in KZN. I actually went to Stanger High School on the North Coast, and as Skura said, I graduated from UKZN. So it's good to be talking to everyone this morning. We are Cape Town based, as everyone knows. Our studio's in Hatfield Street in Cape Town. And we have about 430 people spread across three businesses. We have SAOTA, which focuses on architecture, ARC, which specializes in interior architecture and design, and OCA, which designs custom furniture. So we've got a vertical design structure that allows us to create buildings that have very complementary interiors. And I think one of the things that we realized a long time ago is that what we do is we create environments for people. We don't just, and I think it's this division of kind of labor in design and architecture, sometimes problematic. You know, architects design buildings and then lose the interiors. And environments are created that perhaps don't really do what the architect envisioned that they would do. So being able to control the whole pipeline has been a powerful thing for us. We recently had a staff function in Cape Town, so this is our group. Our model functions kind of as a collective of studios, each led by a principal, and that means it's a set of smaller groups, each with a kind of recognizable hierarchy, and each quite not easy, because nothing's easy in architecture, but quite easy to measure and manage. And this is a result really of one of the things we did first, which was to focus on how to build systems, and to focus on how to use the information that came out of those systems to create an environment that was measurable at the center, which would allow us to be quite responsive to whatever was going on at any certain time. And that's been a continued focus point in practice for us, using tools like Power BI to report, and now also starting to use AI tools, both as organizational tools and management tools, and also in design. So we have these design studios at the core, supported by HR and finance. We've now got a research unit that's helping a lot with materials research and is starting to contribute to design research. We've got a marketing team, which is a fundamental part of what we do. Nobody's going to come to you if you're not able to tell them what you're about. We've got a BIM group. Moving to Revit early on was a good decision. BIM is complicated, and we have, I think, about 6 people now, working on managing our Revit systems and creating components and workflows. We've got an in-house AI unit, which has been quite an interesting and eye-opening experience. AI is coming at us fast, and it's important to keep in the loop. IT is important, and because travel is one of our fundamental activities, we've now got an in-house travel desk. Stefan Anthony started the practice about 30 years ago, the focus on residential projects on Cape Town's Atlantic seaboard. And it's this early work that I think gave us a particular set of skills working on steep sites, often, in Cape Town, extraordinary landscapes, that laid the foundation for what followed. And as I said, gave us a skill set that was actually quite unique. I think it's quite unusual for an architectural company to work to have this residential niche. It taught us a lot about what buildings can do for people, and it taught us a lot about how architecture can become a kind of a filter or lens to engage with the landscape. Cape Town, of course, is also a window into the world, and full of people coming in and out of the city all of the time. And one of the visitors that came into Cape Town was a Senegalese businessman, a guy called Yerim So, who asked us to rework an apartment for him in Granger Bay. He was based in Abidjan at the time and had a mobile company. It had started as a beeper company, and developed into Ivory Coast's first mobile phone company. And he'd sold it to, I think, Erascom in Egypt, and was sitting on a huge pile of cash, and had decided that he wanted to invest in real estate on the continent, particularly in hospitality, and particularly in business hotels across the continent. He started the first project was the Radisson Blu in Dakar. Sorry, Skura, have I lost everyone? Hello?
Hi, Greg. Sorry, your presentation disappeared. If you can just try sharing it again.
All right, I'll do that. There we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, is it still full screen or?
It's full screen.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, so the Radisson was the first significant project that we tackled outside of South Africa, and it was our first real experience of working remotely, and that is now kind of fundamentally what we do. We provide largely design services remotely and work with teams in the different countries we operate in. This project led to other projects in Dakar for Yarim. And then he decided to move his business operation to Geneva, and we set up he asked us to design a house for him in Geneva. And this was the first project that took many of the residential ideas we'd been working with in the residential space about how architecture can create a dialogue and a connection with its environment, and doing it in a colder climate, reworking things that work well here because we have a gentle climate, but doing it in a European climate. And the resulting building that doesn't feel particularly Swiss, probably, but I think it's got these really strong sculptural forms. And of course, it had this really powerful connection with the landscape. And the building feels really like it's just sheltering you from the landscape. It doesn't feel like it's disconnecting you from the landscape, which is one of the things that people see in our work and that they respond to. It's also one of the reasons why people from around the world have make contact, because they see these kinds of buildings and they don't live in places where architects really know how to do these kinds of buildings. So one of the key things we'd also done in practice is we'd always understood the power of the image, and we'd always photographed our work and owned that photography. And this project wasn't an exception, and we ended up with a great set of images. And John Case, who's now director of ARC, our interior architecture company, sent the images to Cool Hunter, which was one of the first big international design blogs, and they published it, which was exciting, but we didn't really it was somewhat accidental, we hadn't kind of thought it through. I don't think John had thought that there'd be any consequence other than hopefully them publishing it. But it set in motion a chain of events that got us out there, and the result was that people started sending emails to info@SAOTA.com from around the world, asking us to connect with them and chat about their projects, which was an extraordinary thing. It kind of took it wasn't like they were phoning or emailing a particular individual. They were just emailing the info account. In fact, now that I think about it, SAOTA didn't quite exist at that point. So it was info at Stefan Anthony Ohmstall Truen Architects, which was a mouthful. And it was at this time we started to think about our identity, and we realized that having a company that was, or a studio that was too connected to individuals was problematic in terms of what we wanted to do, which was to create this kind of architectural brand, as it were, that allowed us to create a presence, one, and two, suppress the individuals as that were associated with it, which had the effect of allowing us then to grow a number of individuals in the company who could then work in different parts of the world behind the brand. And it's I think one of the kind of foundations of the success, because under the brand, it's allowed a number of individuals. It's allowed more individuals to grow, and we've haven't got this problem of kind of people calling us and wanting to work with a particular figurehead. And it's as that market grew, and it really just kind of grew across the world. You know, it's also a consequence, I suppose, of what was happening with technology and the internet. And all of a sudden, and it felt quick. It felt like the whole world was all of a sudden in the same kind of digital space, you know. So you talk to somebody in Lagos or somebody in Sydney or somebody in Canada or Brazil, and they'd all kind of know about you, and they'd know about you because they were all reading the same media. So there was this kind of I suppose like a cultural flattening, which is you know a bad thing and a good thing. So we've ended up with a scenario where we have these teams that work in defined zones around the globe, and that allows them to have quite a deep understanding of what's going on in particular markets and environments. To the extent that, for instance, the teams working in the US work in imperial measurements. People use different technologies around the world, and we become quite skilled in our understanding of what's going on in different places in the world. COVID was a big deal for all of us, obviously, and it forced the world online. And I think at that point, about 60% of our work was already overseas. So remote working or working on remote projects was very much part of our DNA. You know, we were already using technology to have remote calls with teams, and we had a good understanding of how we could constitute agreements with architects and engineers in other cities and create workflows that made sense. But we had fully adopted a whole lot of technologies that really kind of became our foundation. One of them was Teams. Our IT guys had been trying for 5 or 6 years to get us to adopt Teams, with absolutely no penetration outside of their department. But it meant that they understood the infrastructure around Teams. And in the week that we left, it took us about 3 days to get everybody out of the studio into their homes with their computers, get all of those computers mapped onto Teams, and then upload all of our project data into the cloud and implement BIM 360, which gave us a platform that is now kind of a foundational part of our IT system that allows us to work in an online environment with consultants from around the world, and that's a big deal. The other thing that happened was a significant kind of cultural change, both in terms of how people started to think about the way they lived and the way people thought about distance. So with clients now sitting at home, a lot of them started to think that, well, maybe their home environments weren't that great. So there was all of a sudden a huge kind of upwelling of people wanting to do residential projects. And then secondly, the issue of distance had been taken out of the equation. So if somebody in LA who couldn't walk down the street anymore to visit their local architect started to think, well, maybe talking to somebody in the southern tip of Africa is actually viable, because this whole thing's this whole process is going to be digital. And I think in both 2020 and 2021, we had growth of about 30%. We also found that all of a sudden, this remote working model allowed us to start connecting people into the studio who weren't necessarily living in Cape Town. So a group of people, of staff members emerged that sat outside of Cape Town. And of course, one of the other things that happened was that a lot of the people that sat in the studio left Cape Town. And it was almost impossible to know that. I had a very kind of memorable day one day talking to Lamont, who works in my team. We were talking about the weather, and I realized that the weather where he was down the road in Cape Town was clearly different to the weather where I was in Cape Town. He said, "Where are you, Lamont?" "No, I'm in PE." "What do you mean you're in PE?" "I moved here 3 months ago." And that was an interesting eye opener. Anyway, after the lockdowns ended, we decided that we wouldn't go back to the office. Partly because we couldn't. We had about 50 people who are now outside of Cape Town, and partly because nobody wanted to. There were teams that tried to go back and kind of try to implement a 3-day work model, but it just didn't stick. Nobody wanted to go back. The only people who went back were often people who had young children at home and wanted peace and quiet. So the nature of the practice around the studios changed significantly, where the studios now become more of a resource center for us. So we've got the materials library and the research unit. We've got a VR lab. We've got great meeting facilities. So it's active all the time, but not as a functioning studio. As I said, travel's very much part of our DNA, and this idea, with ideas and energy flowing in and out of Cape Town all of the time. And I think one of the things we're really proud of is that we have this vibrant architectural studio sitting here in South Africa, exporting South African skill and ideas, but from inside of South Africa. These are people that would perhaps otherwise be sitting in Dubai or London or Sydney or somewhere else. So being able to access this bigger economy has been a very powerful thing for us. And I think that there's something, South Africans like technology. South Africans are hardworking, and there is this big wide world out there with a lot of opportunity. So we now sit in a position where we've worked in 193 cities around the world, in 86 countries on 6 continents. And what that's done is given us quite a unique understanding of what's going on in the world. It's given us an ability to create a global network, which is an amazing thing, because it keeps us up to speed with what's going on across the globe. We kind of understand these cross-cultural connections, these pollinations. We've got a sense of how the economic energy of the world is shifting. It's a strange time that there's a lot of energy and power shifting back to where it traditionally sat, which is in China and India. And then there's kind of the emergence of Africa and things happening in South America. So a very dynamic environment and an unsettling time, but an exciting time to be working. That the other important thing, which I've perhaps alluded to is that we are now a design-focused business. So we have a primary focus on the first three work stages. Typically, we work with local architects and engineers who would then handle permitting, construction documentation, and do the construction oversight, with us playing a design guardianship role in support in the background. As I've said, travel's given us a unique and broad understanding of what's going on in the world, and it's also created opportunities for growth in the teams. It can be challenging, but it's rewarding. And that's Conakry and Guinea up on the top right, and LA down on the bottom left. So it really is a diverse environment that we work in. That image on the top left, those buildings in the bottom half of the image is a project of ours in Chengdu in China. The house in the bottom left-hand side is a villa that's under construction in Miami. So let's talk a little bit about design and some of the ideas and philosophies that drive what we do. And I think let's kind of dial all the way back and start and look at the essence of what a house actually is. A house moderates our relationship with the environment, and it creates a safe and livable space where human life can thrive. In our approach, it also serves as a lens or filter that enhances our connection with the surrounding landscape, and it says something about us, and it should empower us. Sometimes, well, in South Africa, often housing disempowers people and unfortunately locks in poverty. Across almost every tradition and culture, houses have really had a primary function of providing protection from the elements and from external threats. And these are almost always enclosed spaces with a central hearth, which can be used for warmth, lighting, and cooking. But it is a model that disconnects the inhabitants from the natural landscape on the outside. In regions like South Africa, that have temperate climates, alternative models started to emerge, and the model we all know, and you would of course know well in Durban, is the veranda house, where you get this kind of you get a shaded structure that creates an interstitial space between the cell of the house and the landscape, a transitional space, and a space that people can inhabit and have a very meaningful connection with the landscape in a space that's where the climate is moderated. You know, this hat keeps the rain off and the sun off. And this is a typology that, or an idea that modernism jumped onto, where trying to create a harmony between a built form and a natural environment became an important theme. And it's this modernist tradition that our work builds on. Using light and space to create architecture that's both livable and responsive. Design strategies and conceptual tools. So we have a set of core ideas that allow the work to be universal and adaptable, and creates but can be used to create spaces that are appropriate for their different contexts. And there are a set of foundational elements, which for us are light, space, and life, and which guide our design methodology. And these elements come or form the core pillars of our approach, helping us define a distinctive character to the buildings. And we've always been somewhat curious about what somebody would see in our building from another country, and also how people often can recognize work that comes out of our studios. And I think it's got something to do with this an approach to some of these elements. So focusing on how light, space, and life come together, we're able to shape environments that not only function well, but also resonate emotionally and contextually with their surroundings and with the people who inhabit them. And it ensures that the designs are visually striking, but also deeply connected to the way that people live and experience space. Light is a fundamental element, and it operates on multiple levels in our work. It reveals form and mass through shadow. It evokes emotional responses, and it reduces the need for artificial lighting. It's a tool that we use to animate spaces, create warmth, and connect people to their surroundings. You know, vision is one of our most important senses, and light makes that possible. Space is another important element, and I think as architects, we are almost first and foremost manipulators of space. You know, we start with a raw piece of space sitting in its natural context, and we shape that space to house the various functions that need to be housed. And we then craft connections between these spaces, but also craft connections to the spaces that remain externally, you know, often extending space visually out to the horizon, which in a kind of an explosive way sometimes. You also often see spaces connected diagonally. So in plan, a space might look across another space and then look out at the horizon. And in section, spaces might drop down towards a view or a landscape, often kind of setting up quite a cinematic journey. And this manipulation of space allows us to not only maximize functionality and make these very deep connections to the environment externally, but it also allows us to make spaces that feel larger than they would individually otherwise be. You know, this idea of lending and borrowing space. Life is, of course, what animates these spaces that we create, and life encompasses human and natural elements that we integrate into the buildings. The designs try always to enhance the lives of the inhabitants by creating spaces that support wellness and reflect cultural and social norms. You know, working on a project in Saudi Arabia is very different to working on a project in Mumbai or Brazil. So there are kind of universal things that people respond to, but the spaces need to function in a way to house different cultural practices and norms. We incorporate nature wherever possible, often trying to bring local flora back to the site to, again, foster connection of a sense of connection and belonging. And this idea of drawing landscapes through and over buildings is very much an emerging theme with us, and an idea we're exploring more and more. Together with those pillars, we have a number of strategies and tools that we have defined and work with. One is porosity, this idea of creating permeable spaces that connect buildings to its surrounding, allowing light and air to flow through the spaces. This idea of kind of interconnecting spaces external and internal. Materiality is important. It's you know, using tactile materials can create an extraordinary experience in a building, and using appropriate materials also can make a building more relevant to its place. Storytelling is a useful device, creating a narrative to create deeper connections to history, culture, or even somebody's personal story, or perhaps a fiction. You know, creating a concept is a great way to make a hook that you can build a design onto.
Greg,
Again,
may I disturb you?
sorry?
The score here. There are some red marks on the screen. I don't know if you can see them, But I was quite about it because I don't want us to have 10 minutes trying to deal with them.
Okay, should I try and restart it, reshare it?
Just try and load your presentation again from this page.
Okay.
If we
All right.
can't deal with them, it's fine. They are not actually on the actual images themselves.
Okay. All right. Let me reshare. Okay, I'm back. Are you still full screen?
Yes, full screen. Yeah, I think they're gone now. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's storytelling. Cinema and the idea of using architecture. Architecture can unfold like a sequence of scenes in a film. Moving through time and space is not that different to how a camera might use time to capture the frames of a movie. This idea of time as an architectural device is important. Understanding that people experience things through time, and by cobbling together a set of spaces in time, you can create a set of emotional responses, or set up a sequence that turns architecture into something more. So orchestrating someone's movement through a series of spaces allows you to create moments where you might evoke a sense of surprise or reflection. And it's a very, very powerful tool. Thresholds and transitions, an extension of the previous idea, focuses on being conscious about how you design transitional spaces and how thoughtful transitions can influence and heighten your experience of space. Contextuality, responding to the building's surroundings, including its history, or including history, culture, and landscape, to ground the architecture and give it relevance. Echoing, one of the ideas that we're starting to work with is thinking about how a building might echo its environment, and how these echoes in the building create a resonance and a connection to the environment. And then sustainability, which is, obviously often around guiding material choices or energy use to fit the building into its ecosystem in an appropriate and responsible way. And this is often a particularly difficult thing to do for architects. And I think we've all come to it a little bit late, and it's something we are trying to engage with. All right, let's look at some case studies, and we've picked out a few projects that hopefully illustrate some of these ideas and show you what we've been up to. The first project I want to talk about is a project called Upper Albert in Cape Town. Cape Town has obviously this very extraordinary landscape, and making connections and responding to the landscape is often one of the primary concerns of buildings that we do here. And Upper Albert's an example of how a lot of these principles and design strategies can come together and create a cohesive whole. The project is a multi-residential building in Tamboerskloof. One of the things that's happened in Cape Town is the city's trying to densify the city. So these neighborhoods around the city that have traditionally been single residential were rezoned double residential, and recently rezoned again as you can now build 3 units on almost any site in the city. So this building kind of starts with an investigation of how to do that, and there are actually two. There's this site which has 3 units on it, 2 apartments on the lower level, and then this what looks like a villa on the upper level, and then the site below it has also been reworked into 2 units, but those units all have kind of secondary units. So in the sense that, if you have either a multi-generational family or you simply want to section off a portion of the building and let it out, you have an opportunity to kind of double up the amount of units. So it's a new typology, a denser typology. The neighborhood is full of buildings with red terracotta roofs, and there's traditionally a lot of use of breeze blocks in these buildings. So there's a reference to that materiality and to those screen elements. So in terms of the arrangement of the building, you've got these 2 units at the bottom and then the larger unit sitting across the top. The buildings use the roofs of the spaces below as gardens, and the landscape is drawn again through and over and through the building. And then these screens are put around the building. So the design uses porosity and transparency. And the porosity and the transparency are moderated on the external facade by these screens that maintain privacy but allow a discrete connection to the street and allow the spaces to be flooded with light and air. In this image, the street image, you in the center of the image, you've got the garages on the left-hand side. You can sort of make up the gate in the center that sets up the beginning of a journey that takes you up into the building through a set of level changes and transitions that completely disconnect you from the street by the time you get up into this living space. So this is kind of the high point of the building, where you have these framed views of the city, where you have framed views of the city and the mountain, and you have this heightened sense of drama as you come up into the space. There's a kind of a big expansion of space, and then this explosion out over of space out to the horizon. And you leave a somewhat urban context behind you and come up into this kind of landscaped park-like space. We use light a lot to both light spaces up and to create dynamic forms and spaces, and then create space to support contemporary lifestyles. So this building has these skylights that draw south light in. And here you can see the effect that the screens have, where a private space, the bathroom, can remain largely open to the environment, but feel private from the buildings outside. That's a view from one of the living terraces, looking down towards the city. Another view of the interior of the house, where you can see a very meaningful investigation of materiality. You've got the timber ceilings, which become precast concrete elements externally, the pigmented concrete, the terrazzo floors. Those big green elements is a stone from the Richtersveld that's got copper ore in it. Another internal space. Okay, on to Nigeria. So when working in different regions, we often look for unique markers or attributes that might form the basis for a storytelling concept. We were asked to look at designing an office building in Lagos. And we started to think about what we might find in the city that would inspire us to create a building that felt like it belonged there. Lagos is surrounded by water, the Atlantic Ocean on one side, and an extensive lagoon system on the other. And these small boats have these artisanal miners who go out into the lagoon and mine sand that's used for construction sites across the city. And these made sails filled with winds are really emblematic of the can-do attitude of the city, which, as many of you no doubt know, really knows the meaning of the word hustle. And it gave us a starting point to think about how we might do something with the facades. If those sails reflect the essence of Lagos's everyday life, its palm trees represent a natural world and green the city. I mean, you can see from this image, it's a big city. It's a big, sprawling urban metropolis, and it's poised to become the world's first city with 100 million residents. So, you know, Nigeria is coming at us, guys. These palm trees provide shade and relief from the sun. And one of the things we knew we needed to do in the building was to minimize the building's cooling requirements, and that a screen that shaded the facade was the way to do this. The structure of the palm fronds offered us a functional and meaningful solution and connected the design to the city's identity. So these two ideas come together in the building: the sails energized by the wind and the sheltering palm fronds, which symbolize Lagos's journey towards progress and modernity. We also wanted the building to have a different dialogue towards the street, which in a city like Lagos, often people just wall off the city. So this building has this kind of open relationship with the streetscape, and has a landscape street facade. The tower's tenanted by Meta and Microsoft, and I think it reflects the city's role as an important regional and continental and actually ultimately it's a global business hub. You know, Nigeria has I think close to 200 million people today. It's expected to grow up to 700-800 million people in the next 100 years, which would I think make it the third largest country in terms of population. But of course, many countries' populations are now falling. So it's really one of the dynamic parts or hubs of the world that's emerging. Using materiality, we crafted this perforated screen that interacts with the glass facade, and it gives the facade depth, shadow, and movement, which is also evocative of Lagos's waterways, which adds another layer of meaning to the building. On the office floors, these screens control light, and they give the spaces a unique character. We wanted to continue some of these ideas into the lobby, playing with form, screens, and materiality. And this space emerged. I think it's quite vibrant and dynamic, and it feels like it belongs in Lagos. Another house, Kloof House in Cape Town this time. So Kloof House sits at the top of the city bowl, and its design is deeply influenced by the complex topography of the mountain landscape, which extends from Table Mountain to Lion's Head, Signal Hill, and Table Bay. Here's a model of it sitting where it sits in that space. And key to the building was thinking about how we could actually see all of these things. The building starts as an existing two-level house, so it's a brownfields development, and the core of the house actually remains. The roof came off, but the kind of perimeter walls and the slabs remain. And we wrapped a new program around the front and side of the building, and then split the site in two, and the lower portion was sold off, and another dwelling was developed there. The stone, this is the building, or the fabric that's kind of wrapped around that original structure. And this stone wall, which is made from Table Mountain sandstone, pays homage to the city's history, and it references the Buitengracht wall, which separates the Boerkaap from the city, and it also references the Cape Town Castle, both significant elements in the city. So it grounds it gives the building a strong visual element, but it gives it a contextual anchor as well in the city. So this is the site as it originally was constituted, a single residence sitting on a large site. The lower portion was sectioned off and a building was developed there. And then new fabric was built on the lower level. Because this lower unit was built, the driveway was forced down the side of the house, which means the garages, there was an opportunity to tuck the garages in at the lower level. The garden sits above that garage level, and then a bedroom and a work level. And then up at the top, another kind of landscaped terrace or slab with the living spaces. And then the roof that sits above that, kind of all wrapped around the original structure. From an approach point of view, this idea of kind of thinking about the journey, thinking about this idea of a kind of cinematic response developed, and primarily because we wanted to disconnect the interior spaces, which are quite calm and tranquil, from the busy street. And what happens is you leave the street, you walk down a driveway, you then turn through 180 degrees, walk back up into the building through this heavy steel door. And you have this very nice little courtyard in front of you. And then you turn to your right and come up 3 steps, and you're faced with this view. So a very kind of orchestrated sequence of movement through the space, and it really heightens a sense of arrival, and it really does disconnect you from the street. So, this idea of time, movement, thresholds, and transitions, and how you can transfer somebody from one condition to another condition is a powerful thing. The roof, which intrigues people because it feels like this inverted pyramid from the street, is something that invites exploration. And when people come into the building, you start to realize that it's actually a really kind of functional idea. And it combines a set of clear stories and skylights so that we can draw light into the house, but let views out of the house. The mountain landscape exists in the space that the roof inhabits. So, the roof needed to become a kind of a lens that allowed us to see the mountain. Here's a better view of it. And I think that's become a kind of recurring theme in buildings, that there are views above us, and those views extend out to infinity, which is a useful tool and an exciting thing. And even if you can't see something through those, an object through those roofs, you can see the theater going on above you in the sky. Weather changing, clouds moving across the sky, the sun and the moon moving across the sky. And it was quite a powerful revelation that there's so much going on above you. So the building kind of imagines the conventional house structure, and it creates this set of very fluid landscapes that have this seamless connection with the landscape, with these big glass facades and doors, really erasing the connection between what's outside and inside. So when you open the space up, it really is a veranda space, simply a space that keeps the elements off of you. And again, moderates this relationship with the landscape. This is the garden that sits on the roof of the garage. And this is the roof with its kind of lens-like framing of the mountain above you. And then from the front, the building really kind of disappears. You've got this quite this older, more traditional typology, the red roof building sitting next to our building, and because the landscape's kind of draped over it, because its colors are darker, it simply recedes into the landscape. All right, let's move to a very different place, Aspen in Colorado. So we were asked to look at a building that sits in a valley on the Roaring Fork River and looks out across at the Rocky Mountains. We needed to think a little bit about how we could create a building that was integrated into the landscape in an area that reflected a building that reflected the area's culture. There's this tradition of kind of a chalet typology, and one of the things that's quite interesting in that second image from the left is this kind of serrated profile that gets created from the roofs, which somewhat reflects the silhouette of the mountains. There's also a particular approach to materiality with stone and timber, and then also using earth as an insulating element, these planted roofs, and it creates a set of buildings that feel very kind of rooted in the landscape. Like some of the projects you've seen already, the roof is a critical design element for us, and one of the devices we used was to use the profile of the mountains to kind of create a profile that would allow us to carve the soffit of the roof away. And that then created this dialogue between the soffit of the roof and the mountain landscape, and also referred back to these chalet typologies. So there was all of a sudden a kind of resonance with the way people built things in Aspen and the landscape of Aspen. And this quite extraordinary sculptural, this is a reflected ceiling plan. This quite extraordinary kind of piece of sculpture emerges that then sits across a series of supporting elements and creates this very connected relationship with the landscape. On the left-hand side, you've got the driveway approach, which is more solid, and you can see some of the landscaping coming over those roofs. And then as you move to the right, it just kind of really opens up, sinks down into the landscape, and then opens up to that landscape. And from the river, you get a building that feels quite sculptural with this roof floating over the landscape. And then from the street, you get this building that's much more submerged into the landscape. And you get this, again, this kind of cinematic thing happening of a journey, where this approach to the building, it kind of reveals itself as you get closer, and you've got this kind of very kind of this interpretation of natural materials and plantings, so the stone in the plants. And then this reveal as you get closer of the landscape, and as you come into the building in winter, you'd experience something like this with the fire going and the sliding doors all closed up. These are recessed into the into the roof structure. So there is a horizontal slider at a sliding track at a higher level that then allows you in summer to completely push that wall away and live out into the landscape. The fire is still going, so maybe it is cold. Yeah, I have this kind of extraordinary, almost kind of piece of sculpture that you're inhabiting, which takes on a different character as the year changes. So you go from autumn to winter, to spring, and then to summer. Okay, back to Africa. Let's have a look at a building in Dakar, which is, as I said earlier, the city where we really started to work. Dakar is a coastal city. It's the most western point of the continent. It sits on the Atlantic Ocean, which can be quite abrasive. The downtown area sits to the left of the city and kind of more protected in the bay, and our site kind of faces southwest. It's near an area where we've done some other projects previously. There was a residential development, and further below us on the right hand side is that Radisson Hotel I spoke about earlier. It sits on the Corniche Road, which is a very busy thoroughfare, which kind of runs around the city, and also a very active thoroughfare from a pedestrian point of view. You know, people in Dakar love to run and exercise. They love to walk. It's always full of life. It's a busy, vibrant city with a great street culture and a great beach culture. You know, you go down to the beaches, people are exercising, they're playing football, they're walking up and down the promenade. It's a great place. It's a city that has a rich tradition of handcraft, and for many people, that's the way they make a living. And you know, when you're in Dakar, you see a lot of people working with sculpting rock and timber, and you know, you even come across people making sun-dried adobe bricks. It's also quite a powerful, somewhat rocky landscape in places. So you get these big basalt rock formations, which are kind of split by the elements and time eroded. Those are old Second World War military installations, by the way. So we started with a singular mass, which represents kind of a typical building envelope, or represented the opportunity that kind of came out of the zoning regulations. And then wanted to take this idea of craft and making as a kind of a foundational idea. And so the building got split, so the masses better reflected the finer urban grain of the city. And then we displaced those elements to make a better connection to respond to setbacks and make a building that was more dynamic in its form. We sculpted the mass out and then inserted the program, which is largely residential. And here you can see how the building also sits down into the landscaping. This, you know, parking program at the bottom, and then apartments that sit above that. I think this is a video. So we, you know, it cut down into the site, put that mass in, split the mass, shift it, carve it, put the program into it, put a roof on it that shades it, put facades on that protect it from the elements and privacy, and end up with this very kind of sculptural mass that has a much harder face back onto the street. And that facade has certain cutaways that on the bottom right-hand side, that's a coffee shop. On the top right, the facades cut away to create views back towards the city. And then this very extraordinary kind of crack in the building that creates an entry point for us. It's not particularly prevalent in contemporary buildings, but we want to use adobe bricks and compacted around earth to create this kind of sheltering element, and that also together with passive cooling strategies around ventilation allow the building to breathe. The other element we are exploring is making up, using reeds to make pressed panels for insulation. Obviously, we can't completely get away from concrete, so the cores and some of the structural elements will be in concrete. There should be enough soil on the site to do the rammed earth walls. So on the arrival facade, we have these vertical slots that allow natural ventilation and that allow light to filter into the building and the back of house areas. And then as a counterpoint to these heavy mass elements, we've got this blade-like roof that hovers over the building. Another video here. The idea was also to work with surfaces in different ways, so that the external surfaces could be made from a rougher external shutter board, and then the internal surfaces could be cast in a reusable steel shutter. So you get this kind of transition from rough to smooth. And then this is the quality of the spaces looking out over the Atlantic. The little pause point for this coffee shop on the corner. And then this extraordinary kind of canyon that develops at the entrance into the building, which reflects the geometry of those basalt rock formations. Here you can see the different surface finishes. Entrance canopy. It's that one. This is one of the basalt rock structures that contributed to that idea of that split between the buildings, which creates this, I think, quite extraordinary space. And then this view out to the ocean from that center space. A building in Madeira called Colina. One of the I spoke a little bit about echoing as a mechanism to create a response to the site. So this is like Cape Town, very steep site, and we played around with a lot of ideas about trying to create a response that made sense to the context, whether it's cultural, architectural, historically, or response to the topography. And at a point, we realized that the bay had this extraordinary curve, and our building really kind of connects directly to that geometry. And this idea of the curve as it kind of runs, the building curving as it runs down the site, and then setting up this response and this kind of dialogue that really just, as you come into the building and then move down to the living spaces, it's just never ending, the two elements playing off against each other. And you get this really strong kind of resonance between the building and the space. A building in Geneva. So this actually was another connection that came through our Senegalese client, for a guy in Geneva who wanted to build a villa that overlooks the Lake Leman and looks across to the Alps. And again, this idea of echoing comes into play. There's a particular geometry in the form of the mountain that became a hook for the form of the building, and allowed us then to kind of really create this kind of sculpture. So you've got the building facing the mountain and vice versa, and this dialogue between the two of them. And you've got this very fluid concrete building, and the nature of concrete is fluid, so it's well suited towards doing structures like this. From the top, there's a forecourt. Then the architect, the client is an avid art collector, so the first portion of the building, which is clad in zinc, is an art gallery which runs down into the 4 levels into the bottom of the building, and then the living program sits beyond that. And again, you have this kind of set of transitions and thresholds that take you into the building. And parts of the building kind of almost become kind of a piece of art in their own right as you come into this gallery space. You can see a really kind of strong response to light, to those ideas of light, space, and life being used to animate the building. And the front door kind of becomes, as I said, this piece of art in its own right, sitting in this gallery space. As you come into the main part of the living program, the building takes on this much more fluid form. At the top on the left, you can see the sunshade that was developed to keep to control the sun coming into the building. But again, a space that's really kind of really flooded with light, and a space that has very ambiguous connection to landscape that allows in winter, when it's closed up, allows one to still observe the landscape, which is very animated. It's animated by seasons, it's animated by the city in the distance, it's animated by the lake and weather. This is the courtyard space that separates the gallery from the living program, and also protects the building from colder winds from the north. And then the kind of terrace, pool, and garden spaces at the front of the building. This is 4 stories down. And these courtyards and skylights really kind of allowed us to flood light right down into the bottom of the building. So yeah, I think it worked really well. And as I said, it's that idea of drawing the light right through spaces is an important device for us. And this is just a poured concrete wall that sits behind the pool in the basement. And here you see the building, looking back at the building, kind of lowered into its, starting to kind of bed down into the landscape. A project we're currently working on. West Africa is having a moment. Lots of work happening. Douala is a busy city. It sits on an estuary like many of those other cities in West Africa. And this is a project to create a hotel, a big congress hall, and an apartment building in a large residential estate. It sits on the edge of Woori estuary near the airport. And in the distance, you can see Mount Cameroon, which is a large active volcano. There's actually a volcanic range which runs really down from here down to Bioko Island, which is Equatorial Guinea, which is where Malabo is, and then down to Sao Tome and Principe down in the Atlantic Ocean. And the hooks here, from a storytelling point of view, we wanted to talk to this environment. So the idea of this drawing this kind of mangrove landscape again through and over the building is important. And there's a direct reference in the Congress Hall form to the volcano in the distance. There's also, a large project like this, you've got real issues with scale, and we wanted the building to be quite porous and permeable, and it's got these edges that break down, creating a kind of set of living spaces that are, really great to be in and have a very strong relationship to the water. Also drawing from Cameroonian architectural traditions, we want to work with timber and terracotta elements. Cameroon has some really beautiful traditional architecture, clay buildings, often with timber colonnades sitting around them. So there's a direct reference to these buildings, and then you can see how the landscape is kind of draped back onto the site. And from this approach, you actually drive up a driveway into a forecourt that allows you then a connection to the apartments, to the hotel, or to the Congress Hall, but through a landscape. So you kind of get lost in this landscape, and the scale of the building really just kind of breaks down. And then from the front, you can see these ideas of permeability. So that crack in the building allows us to kind of move through the building from the entrance to the riverside, but also then play with the nature, the quality and nature of the space in that entrance zone, and again create a series of transitions and thresholds that set up this journey through the building. And that is it. So hopefully that has given you a sense of what we do, our journey to get into this position, and many of the tools and ideas that help us shape the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Greg. I think over the years, it's very clear that you have developed your craft or how you craft buildings into a signature style, and congratulations for the work that you've done. Now, in working with projects outside South Africa, especially if you don't do stage 5, I guess you have to do quite a lot of detailing so that the architects of record in that country can take over. I guess also specification. Not all material companies are international construction companies. What would you say is the biggest thing that you've learned working outside the country in different contexts, different suppliers, different ways of doing things in different countries? What would you say is one, maybe two things that you've learned from working outside the country?
Well, I think adaptability is one, which is a good characteristic for an architect to have. So yes, those are all huge challenges. So typically, what happens is we want to get local architects involved in the project literally from day one if we can, because one of the key things that needs to happen is that the design is localized, right? In terms of the systems, engineering, constructability, materials, etc., etc. So we typically run a process where, and we're now in the position in many places where we have a good sense of how those markets are structured and what's possible and what's not possible. But typically we would do a concept that would have a kind of outlined set of specifications and materials, and then there'd be an engagement with the local team and a substitution of materials and details. Now, as everyone knows, that's a process that continues into stage 5, or well, 4 and 5. In 5, when you start subcontracting out elements, subcontractors that are appointed might come back with completely different systems or propositions. You might find that a material that you thought would work either isn't available anymore, or it's too expensive, so somebody substitutes it. So that idea of design guardianship, where we are involved throughout the life of the construction of the project, usually through a set of kind of milestone workshops, is designed to allow that to happen, or understand that is going to happen, but manage the consequences.
Thank you, Greg. Colleagues, may I open up questions and comments from anyone? And how easy is it to get environmentalists, Greg, in places that are remote and they are not in your typical area that you usually work in? because some of the places with luxury houses, I'm sure you'll get so some houses that have some environmental sensitivity to them. How easy is it to get someone to work with there so that your approach to architecture, which you already have, which is a sensitivity, has got a consultant that can really work with you to realize that an environmentalist.
Most places we have access to those that kind of support, So it is quite rare today to not have access to something. It might be perhaps through the form of a landscape architect, but certainly on these larger projects, we're usually dealing with consultants who know what they're doing. Again, the world's kind of flattened, in many ways, and people are working generally in the same kind of way with the same issues consideration, the same kinds of consultants, a common understanding of how to do things. One of the consequences of South Africa being geographically isolated and being culturally and politically isolated for a long time is I think we don't really understand how interconnected a lot of the rest of the world is, and how people work with each other. So that's been an interesting part of the journey.
Great. Ken?
Thanks, Gura. Firstly, Greg, thank you very much for a fantastic presentation, a very wide range of work. However, one thing that seems to come through very clearly, very strongly, is your determination to localize and to have specific reference to the locality. How do you go about this? Do you actually visit the sites yourselves? Do you use internet extensively? How do you actually come to the conclusion that, yes, that mountain range is important to this particular site?
It's a combination of all of those things. So visiting sites is important. One of the things that the lockdowns did where we couldn't visit sites is we realized the importance of big topography models. So we build these topography models that might be 30 kilometers across, 40 kilometers across, so you can get mountain ranges in. So a lot of work goes into making digital models that have topography and have built fabric in them, so that in a model form we can really kind of unpack what relationships exist and which ones are important. The internet's critically important. Site visits are important. I think it's a combination of all of the above. But those digital models we found have been quite transformational.
Thanks, Ken. So, Greg, I think managing now the largest practice in South Africa, really, as far as architecture is concerned, brings complexities. I mean, we architects, I always say this, we architects are untrained to be business people. We are actually designers. That's what we obsess about. And I have heard that when you're in a presentation, you use BIM, etc. What would you say is a key share to the architectural community in how you feel a large practice could be run efficiently like you guys do?
Well, it's collecting the data and measuring it, So we have a series of internal processes. One of which is we, for instance, have daily meetings to review RFPs that have come in. We have a very deep dive every month to look at the profitability of projects, the project pipeline that sits ahead of us. I think it's just being able to see what's going on around you, and that's easy to say and difficult do. We've always liked data. We use Power BI a lot now, which kind of allows us to connect different databases and create different ways of seeing things. So, yeah, we do a lot of work measuring the temperature of markets around the world so that we can see what's heating and cooling. In fact, one of the things that has happened to us is because we work globally. It's quite interesting how economies kind of heat and cool in a cyclical way around the world. So as something cools down in one, there was a year where Lagos was our biggest market, and then Lagos vanished because of problems with the oil price and the naira. And then Los Angeles emerged, and then Los Angeles vanished because somebody changed the zoning regulations. And then, Dubai emerged, and India's popping up, and Lagos is back. And so that global footprint had allowed us to weather these economic cycles that are often such a big issue for architects.
Thank you so much, Greg. Let me see if I got a chance. Martha?
Morning. Yes, thank you. It was an absolutely beautiful presentation, and I think you've got a great system going with the remote working and all of that. What I would like to ask is just, do you have any kind of social consciousness in the work? Is there any scope for designing for the other 99%? I have to just ask because it's all like really high end. So what about the rest of them?
No, it's a good question, and one of the so we do some pro bono work. I think that on one hand, on the other hand, architecture is a difficult space, and it's a difficult. Architects rely on people with resources to do work, and they rely on decision makers to create environments for work to be done. So we sit in South Africa, for instance, with an absolutely enormous housing crisis, with an absolutely enormous housing program, with exactly 0 architects involved in it, because the government didn't set up a system that allowed architects to participate. It's, quantity surveyors and engineers. So it's difficult to craft space that allows for meaningful engagement. I think also, we've thought one of the things that's become important to us is this idea that we contribute in other ways, and to South African society and to the design community, and that's really one of the things that we're very proud of is that we've created a huge kind of pool of employed South African architects who are in South Africa, and contribute to local and national economies. We put a lot of work into skills development. With our African partners, we do a lot of skills transfer. A lot of the Nigerian teams run Revit systems that we've been instrumental in setting up. So we are conscious of trying to contribute. We do quite a lot of work in architectural education in SA with a bursary program. But it is extremely, my sense is that architects really are kind of excluded from society in many ways, from the kind of centers of power. We have very little influence of what happens in our cities and communities, and that's a terrible thing. You know, in our country, like many other countries, you know, we need political support, we need legislation, we need people to write legislation that creates space for us if we're going to make a meaningful contribution here. But what's happened here, unfortunately, is we've, you know, I don't know, built 6 million houses or 8 million houses and simply locked 6 or 8 million people into poverty in communities that sit far outside of our cities, and that will lock poverty into those communities for generations. You fly over the country, you see these kind of isolated communities sitting outside of every single town and city in the country. So you see the power of architecture, the power of bad architecture, but you see very little space for good architecture.
Thanks, Greg. Chisomo?
Hi, yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. Maybe just a question about how much input you've gotten from these international projects on water and energy related sustainability. Are you seeing yourselves reinventing the way that you approach energy efficiency? Are you trying to get to a point where your buildings, whilst, you know, aesthetically pleasing, also start to lean towards more efficient carbon sequestration materials?
Well, I think South Africans are quite far ahead of the curve in many respects with regards to things like generating power on site, and also using passive strategies with regards to light and ventilation. You know, a lot of the rest of the world has climatic challenges that we perhaps don't have. So there's a high reliance on things like air conditioning, which is a big consumer of power. We've been doing some work on trying to use what's the word? Use kind of moderated air conditioning systems, you know, where you drop the humidity and the temperature a little bit, but then rely on natural ventilation as a kind of for its cooling effect to reduce electrical use. So there are emerging technologies, but it's not easy. You know, you work in Nigeria and you have to import all of your glazing. At least you're not importing cement anymore, but that you know, that used to be the issue. So we are trying to localize materials more. As I said, use lots of passive techniques where we can to reduce heating and cooling requirements, and to source things locally and make things locally.
Thanks, Chisomo, and thank you, Greg. I'm not sure if there's any other question or comment before we close. I think we all enjoyed that presentation, Greg. Thank you so much for the insight and for the work that you shared over the years. What can you say? Just your parting comment as we close.
Not sure I have a parting comment. I mean, for us, it's been an amazing, somewhat surreal journey. And yeah, we're looking forward to continuing it.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Greg. We appreciate you taking time to be with us.
All right. Thank you, everyone.